Okay, are we on, Sarah?
Yes, we are recording.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah, for doing all this. And I'd like to welcome Samantha Johnson to our Bionic Design Forum. This is a monthly event we have as part of e-NABLE to get, you know, up to date on exciting new developments in bionic systems and such like. And we're very grateful to have Samantha on this month, and she's got some great work going on in assistive robotics. So, Samantha, it's all yours.
Wonderful. Well, thank you all so much for having me. I'm excited to chat with you today. I'm just going to share my screen. Oh, are you able to give me the permission to share my screen real quick?
Yes, let me make you a co-host. Hold on one second. Um, okay, you should be able to share now.
Perfect. All right. I'm just share this. Oh. All right, everyone can see that okay? Wonderful. All right, well, as mentioned, I am the founder and CEO of Tatum Robotics. We are developing assistive technology for people with deaf blindness, and in doing so, developing highly anthropomorphic, collaborative, and compliant robotics. So as an estimate, there are about 150 million people worldwide who are concurrently deaf and blind. So they are unable to hear nor see. And as a result, they communicate with a tactile form of sign language. So many of you might be familiar with visual signs. A deaf person may sign, "Hi, my name's Sam." But because they're deaf and blind, they're unable to see these signs. So instead, they actually hold on to the hand of the person they're signing with, as you can see here. And in that way, he's actually able to feel the signs that are being relayed to him. However, as you can imagine, because they need to be in constant contact with somebody, their independence is severely limited. They're unable to communicate if there isn't somebody sitting, 2 feet away from them. As a result, we see a decreased access to education. They're about 23 times less likely to be educated than students without disabilities. Increased instances of, I think I'm now getting all of the admits for the room, but I assume somebody else can enable that, let people in. They're unable to access, healthcare settings, leading to increased rates of anxiety and depression that are linked to isolation and loneliness. However, there is technology right now that they are able to use, some deafblind people specifically. So about 10% of deafblind people is estimated that know Braille. So Braille is a medium of English, or whatever spoken language it is. So essentially, if a capitalized letter in English, it would be capitalized in Braille as well. It's the complete identical form, punctuation-wise, things like that. However, a lot of deafblind people don't know Braille, and the main reason for that usually is either they became deafblind later in life. So a very common form is somebody is maybe born deaf, and then they lose their vision when they're around 30 or 40 years old. And as a result, they weren't educated to learn Braille, and maybe didn't know English either. It's completely different. It's a different language, ASL and English. They might not be familiar with the language. And primarily, if you're born deaf and blind, traditionally you also have a cognitive disability, and that just makes it even more difficult to learn Braille. For example, the Perkins School for the Blind, which I'm based in Boston, it's here in Watertown. They have a school for deaf-blind children, and they actually don't teach Braille. None of their current students are learning Braille. And we see that as a result, instead, deaf-blind students, deaf-blind adults are using tactile forms of sign language, primarily through interpreters. So interpreters are highly skilled. They're able to create very customized language needs for these deaf-blind individuals. And the issue that presents, however, is just that there are a shortage of interpreters. Interpreters cannot be present with deafblind people all day, every day in their homes, and they are expensive. Deafblind interpreters specifically, having them needing to be in person, having the need for that constant contact with a deafblind person, it leads to you needing 2 interpreters per interpreting session with a deafblind person. It's expensive. It takes a long time to book their services. And as a result, our aim is to create something that can be used independently like a Braille tablet, but provides that accessibility that an interpreter does. Our solution as a result is a tactile signing system. You can see this video here. It's presenting quite laggy on my screen, but maybe it looks better on yours. So the way that this works is it will take in written or spoken media and translate it into tactile signing for the deafblind person to receive. And this system is designed to be used and have custom features for each individual deafblind person. So the deafblind person would actually hold on to the back of this as it's signing, and as a result can just feel the signs in their hand if they're holding on to the back of it. And as I mentioned, it can be used in a number of different ways. So you can either directly text or talk into it. So we have developed essentially like a Skype for our system. So it's a messaging service. So you can type into it, you can be right next to them, or you could be, 1,000 miles away, and they're able to receive that content. The second is text-based communication mediums. This is really giving deafblind people first-time access to entertainment, whether that be books or news or emails, or allowing them to search the web. And that all that content actually is translated. So they won't just be given, this complicated news article. They'll actually be able to translate that given the custom needs of each deafblind individual. And lastly, the functionality we're working on now is allowing remote real-time signing. So whether that be interfacing with an interpreter in the middle or using our gesture recognition system that we're working on to really allow this system to be two-way communication. Getting into the specifics of the hardware itself, the hand itself is 18 degrees of freedom. Each finger has 3 degrees of freedom, allowing for flexion and extension at the MCP and DIP joints, as well as, your thumb has 3 degrees of freedom and the wrist has 3 degrees of freedom. And then that can attach actually to an arm that will allow for more complex signing. So that hand you saw on the last slide, that is our tactile finger spelling hand. It only does finger spelling. It does not do the full vocabulary and language of American Sign Language. Instead, we actually take that hand, we put it onto an arm, and that will allow it to do more complex signing. And that includes the 22 degrees of freedom. The goal for this is for it to be completely safe to be in constant contact with the user. So this is going to be used with people who can't hear or see the device. They're not familiar with technology or collaborative robotics. So instead, what we're doing is trying to design to ensure safety under any use case. So anywhere that the deafblind user is coming in contact with is made out of a compliant material. A TPU specifically, so that if a deafblind person gets stuck in it, they're not going to get injured or hurt. And the motors are all torque limited to ensure, again, that safety factor. And we try to optimize it for ease of maintenance, really. Again, this is going to be in the homes of deafblind people, making sure that this is easy to repair as needed with somebody who's not skilled. So maybe a family member or somebody would be able to repair if needed. And as I mentioned, so we have that finger spelling hand as well as the T1 signing system. So that allows for more complex signing. And both of those have this software solution integrated in the middle. So this is our Tatum Translate. So English and ASL are two completely different languages. They do not resemble the same grammar patterns, the same vocabulary. And so what we have done is created a translation tool to move between those two languages, specifically highlighting unique grammar used in tactile signing for deafblind individuals here. This takes into account regional differences, grammar differences based on age, based on education level, and specifically allows this content, it's all stored in the cloud. So as users maybe become more proficient or learn new words, we can actually adapt it for their needs that way. Some of the ways that this is integrated in the finger spelling hand is, again, as you get that news article, a sentence could be, 15 words long. For tactile finger spelling, that would be way too much. So we're actually able to break it out by clause, again, just making sure that this content will be accessible, switching out vocabulary for synonyms, using words that deafblind people would be more familiar with. Again, all of this based on the education and background of the deafblind person. So no one deafblind person's experience with the robot will be the same as another. The way we actually get this into the hands of deafblind people, so the World Federation of the Deafblind estimates that there are about 2.3 million Americans with deafblindness. And naturally, deafblindness, like all disabilities, exists on a spectrum. So these people might just be old, and have decreased vision and hearing, or these people might be, concurrently deaf and blind due to a congenital disability. There could be a number of reasons this comes out. However, the way that these Americans get this product, the main way is through iCan Connect, which is a distribution program through the FCC. And the way that this works is actually the FCC works with iCan Connect, and they actually do the purchasing, maintenance, and training of these devices for deafblind individuals. So for example, if a deafblind person did know Braille, the way that they would get that Braille tablet and learn how to use that Braille tablet is currently through the iCan Connect program. So we're working with the founder of iCan Connect, Jerry Barrier, to make sure that our system falls into that same requirement system so that deafblind people, no matter where they are, no matter, you know, what their experience might be with the robot, they're able to get the robot, get trained on it, and use this for their individual needs. And we're naturally starting in the home, but we do see a number of different applications for this product. So one obviously being in education, the teachers, especially even in, you know, school systems like the Perkins School, where they have access to, you know, best in class, small class sizes, that is still 5 students for 2 teachers. So they can't always provide that one-on-one. So how can this tool be used to supplement the teachers offering that education? The next one is healthcare, and I have this highlighted because we want to be very clear that this is not meant to replace interpreters in a hospital room when, you know, the doctor is conveying that information to the patient. This is something that can support the patient, you know, maybe when they first arrive to that hospital and they're in that waiting room waiting for an interpreter to arrive, and they can get information that way instead. Or maybe, you know, they're having a prolonged stay at the hospital, and this is something that, again, an interpreter cannot always be present. This is something that, you know, if a nurse comes in and asks them if they need water, they could use this device. It's something that we want to support the healthcare system and support interpreters in healthcare, but not replacing the interpreters in any form, in any case throughout this process. The inspiration for this project was actually during COVID, when obviously social distancing was quite devastating to the deafblind community, because again, there was no one-on-one care, and those social interactions were impossible. So we're working with DHS as well to see how this could be used for applications in, you know, emergency alerts or weather warnings. We're here in Boston, we get weather warnings every week. So how could this be used to convey that to deafblind individuals? Also, naturally, we're looking to see if there's applications in soft robotics. We're developing highly compliant anthropomorphic systems. Is there applications for that? This is designed to look and feel like a human hand, and seeing if there is applications for that. And then lastly, obviously, we're developing this ASL translation and seeing how that can be used in maybe gesture recognition softwares or making content more accessible. So far, we've tested it with about 50 deafblind individuals. And here you can see some of our deafblind testers here and some of their remarks. And we can see that a lot of the deafblind people were really excited about this project. So this actually started as my master's thesis while I was at Northeastern about 4 years ago now. And we got so much excitement, and this is really how this became a company. Is the deafblind community that we were working with really urged me to push this forward, to make it become a product, to make this really have a commercial application so that it supports them. I always make the joke that I get more hugs than any startup founder has ever gotten, because really, as we demonstrate this to more deafblind individuals, we hear more about the isolation and how this impacts. If you look here on the left, you can see an older version. It's all tendon driven. So we used to have the motors right here in the forearm of the arm. And so all the tendons routing out that way. As you can imagine, that led to immense overheating issues. So they're no longer kept there. But that was some of the earlier stages there. And where we're seeing is almost perfect recognition rates. And we credit that to the customization possibilities by using this device. And our team obviously includes people who do embedded system software, hardware, as well as many deafblind individuals as well, that really help make sure all these decisions are based in customer discovery. As well as that customer discovery also leads into development partnerships. So as I mentioned, the Perkins School for the Blind, really helping to understand how those deafblind kiddos understand language and really learn language to begin with. The Deafblind Contact Center is actually our founding partner. This whole idea for the concept came out of the Deafblind Contact Center, and they're here in Boston, the largest social group in Boston for people who are deafblind. So all of those people on the left side are actually just people who are members of the Deafblind Contact Center. Again, really ensuring that as we create new ideas, that these are all validated by the deafblind community themselves. And then lastly is the Helen Keller National Center. They are a center located in New York for people who, you know, become deafblind as adults or children, but we mainly work with their adults units to really help them learn assistive technology, what offerings are there. Naturally, we're also doing pretty complicated robotics. So working with some key robotics partners here in Boston, Mass Robotics, which obviously you all know Tom. We're being based here for the last couple of years, and the Institute for Experiential Robotics at Northeastern University is where we got started, and some other product development firms. And thank you for your attention. And I'm sure there might be some questions. I'm happy to dive more into the technology. I know you all are maybe technologists yourself, so I'm happy to take any questions there. John, I see a hand.
Thank you very much, Samantha. This is very impressive.
Go ahead, Vivek.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a bunch of questions, so I have a few, but John, you were saying
No,
something?
you can go ahead, Vivek. You go first.
So how far along are you in the productization phase, if you might call it that? And is this going to be a commercial offering at some point, or
Yeah,
what's the
absolutely. So
plan?
we've definitely been in that sort of R&D stage now for a while. And actually next week, we're gearing up for the start of our betas. So all of these tests so far have either been done, all these like 50 deafblind people we've tested with so far have either been in my office, or we're going to different deafblind community centers. We're traveling to DC, Connecticut, New York, and really getting deafblind people's hands on it. But starting next week, the goal is actually to get these into the hands of deafblind people in their homes. So this will be used for 6 weeks in deafblind people's homes. So we can really see, again, the whole system's cloud-based, so we can see what they're using it for, the duration. I can see which motors are still working, if they're making it to the desired positions. I can monitor all that remotely. So that will actually start next week. The training process will begin, making sure definitely people understand how to use this user interface. Obviously, this is very new. So the training process for that will start next week. And that's really when we're moving towards that commercialization and moving towards getting this into the homes of deafblind individuals.
Great. And is this a 3D printed arm or okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Got it.
So it is fully right now there's a couple machined parts, but most of it is 3D printed. So we've played a lot with different materials, different resins, different orientations, a lot of different things. So right now we are using TPU based fingers. We have some multi-jet fusion parts, nylon, SLS. But the goal really is to make this low cost. Naturally, it doesn't help anybody if I make a really cool $80,000 robot arm, so it needs to fit into these government programs and that do have very specific price structures for them. So we are doing a lot of 3D printing and doing a lot of testing to ensure the longevity of these as well. So right now we've gotten up to 1 million cycles of all of our kind of subsystems there. So that's pretty refreshing for us to understand kind of if we need to have, maintenance throughout the way, it's okay, but really understanding what that maintenance structure will look like.
Great. Any other questions?
Sure. Hi, Samantha. I'm sorry I missed the beginning of this. Did you show any video of the device in action at the beginning?
I can pull it back up if that would be helpful. Was
I'd
the
love to see
video
that.
all laggy for you guys, or did that look okay?
No, it's been great.
Okay,
It's fine.
okay. Let's pull it back up. Zoom. I am a Zoom user. You'd think I'd be more proficient at it at this point, but
It's a moving target.
yeah. All right. So here we are. And there's videos on our website as well, but I don't know if this is laggy for you.
Got
But essentially the
So
deafblind
this one is finger spelling.
it's finger spelling.
And yet you do have an ASL version, which includes wrist and arm movement.
Yep, so this has wrist movement as well. So this will do anything you're supposed to, your P's, your J's, it'll have a rotation for 16, 17, all those great things. So this will do letters, numbers. We have basic signs like yes and no, but nothing, we don't want it to be kind of confusing with signing versus spelling. And then we are developing out, it has 4 degrees of freedom in the arm, you have your elbow and your 3 degree of freedom shoulder. And what we're working on now, that is in much earlier stages, mainly due to the safety factor that comes into that. Naturally, this is very stationary. We can make sure all of the design is compliant. When we now have a much longer robotic arm with people who, again, can't see it, that safety factor is highly prioritized. So that's in much earlier stages, but we're working right now on mapping signs directly from deafblind people. So we have about 15 signs mapped right now that we've been testing and really trying to figure out signing frames, signing spaces, and understanding how that can be made for the deafblind community.
So this is indeed the kind of thing that that people like Vivek and I are really very interested in. It's not clear to me that there are any obvious intersections, any obvious synergies with what we do at e-NABLE, except that you use 3D printing and you're developing cool technology for the assistive community. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about
Right. I know
parallels
you
or
guys are mainly
relationships.
focused on low-cost prosthetics. Is
Yeah,
that correct?
that's
Yeah.
right.
A lot of people have kind of asked us if this can be used as a prosthetic, and right now it's kind of the opposite of
different
that. You know,
story.
we wanted to have no grip force and really that safety factor. But I think the benefit of this is really making a robust tendon-driven system. I think where we obviously looked a lot to prosthetics in early stages for, you know, inspiration, design ideas, and where we really kind of found a lack is just like the lack of degrees of freedom that prosthetics tend to have. Obviously, you can only have so many motors and things like that. But as we're designing, a lot of the goal that we're having is right now, obviously, the goal is to make it work. That is the first step, make it work. It can be as big as it needs to be. It's fine. The hand itself is anthropomorphic, but as you can see, it's essentially sitting on this shoebox that holds all the motors. Has the processor, has the fans, all those things. But we're actually working with this group in India, Sense International India, making a portable version. You know, how can this be something that people can carry around? So I think if we're able to do that more effectively, I think that would be kind of where this could be a really interesting synergy, as if we can make it more portable, how can we use that to make a, you know, a version that maybe is more wearable or something of that nature, because it does have all of those degrees of freedoms and has that compliance.
And can you say a little bit about the foundational software? Is this a sequencing based approach? Is it a neural network based approach? All of that geeky stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of twofold. So we develop our own, we do all the hardware, we do all the software. We're obviously using the motors we're using are Dynamixel servos, if you're familiar, that obviously have an SDK. But we develop out our own custom SQL servers. It's all cloud-based, as I mentioned. So we have a Pi on board that obviously controls the motors moving to begin with. So all of the processing is done online, is done in the cloud, and then all of the so what happens essentially, if a deafblind person clicks the button, it will say messaging, and it actually goes up to the cloud to figure out what that button means. We're able to go into our databases, find the servo positions for that, and stream those down. So all of it is streamed, is all sent synchronously, and really to make sure that everything is moving in a way that a human hand would. We spend a lot of time figuring out how human hands work. We spend a lot of time trying to develop these databases to be, you know, how PID values will vary based on the hand shapes that they're moving to, and really understanding, you know, if you go from S to M, you can't just move the servos there, that won't do anything. So how can we kind of store these databases that move into that whole transition of the hand as well? So we've developed out a lot of custom databases. Our SQL server is, there's too many tables to even begin to list what is in there. But again, the goal really is that customization. So everything's written in .NET IoT, which allows us to connect to the cloud, to allows us to have all of these functionalities using hardware without having to have processors on board that cost a lot of money, that are very heavy, that are very just really instead have a very thin client living on board.
I see Eric is here. He says, awesome presentation and very exciting and interesting work. I don't know if he's live with us or he has a voice, but here you go.
Questions.
It's got some
What's the shore hardness of
questions.
the TPU? Great question. We've played with a lot of different ones. Right now we're using, I believe it's 85A. We have played with higher, we've played with lower. It's a fun little optimization strategy because we need to make sure that it's easy to bend, easy enough to bend, but the wires don't tear through. So it's definitely something we play with a lot, but that is what we're using right now. And any guidance on ISO asymmetric? That's actually a really great question, because there, as you know, are not a lot of guidances and standards for collaborative robotics. We're actually working with MITRE. I'm sure you guys are familiar with MITRE right now, and actually helping to develop a lot of those guidances. I can send after this a list of the guidances that we do use, and a lot of them are obviously, I live 30 miles from MITRE. Well, if you guys are interested, I'm sure they would love more people in on this project in trying to help develop more standards for collaborative robotics, because obviously a lot of the testing we do is, oh, is it safe? You know, definitely people with their hands in it, it's safe, but really, is there something that we should be using that is more well validated, that is something more robust in terms of protocols that way? So what we're going to be doing, I can send you again the lists for what we've been using so far, but hopefully there's a lot more information to come on that front as MITRE and us continue digging into that. Any plans on using some of the sign language data for training computer vision models? Yes. So we're using right now sign language data for a number of things. So the first we're using it for is actually mapping the signs onto the hand. So a deaf or deafblind person comes in, they sign, we track them, we're using obviously open source frameworks, but developing our own algorithms to map that onto the hand itself. So that's one thing. We don't really see any need for AI models for that. It seems pretty clear. But the goal is actually just, again, make this very accurate to human signing. Where we are using machine learning and AI models is in our gesture recognition. So as I mentioned, we're not only doing this hardware effort, but also software effort to make this two-way. So a deafblind person, not in this video itself, but on one of our models here, we actually have a camera on board. So a deafblind person can sign back. So this, they're chatting with Vivek there, and he says, "Hi, how's your day going?" They can actually respond back. So for that, we are using a lot of signing data and using machine learning models. And that is brilliant for computer vision. What we are also looking in terms of computer vision is maybe seeing if we can use that for environmental safety and really making sure that there's nobody, that can get injured, and really making sure things are looking that way. But our main use of using the signing data for computer vision is in that gesture recognition in front. That being said, we understand we are a small team. There's 6 of us. We are not going to win the gesture recognition race. Very hopefully, Microsoft beats us and puts out something that we can integrate into our system. So we're kind of developing very, right now we're doing finger spelling, we're doing very simple signs, but again, just allowing it to be two-way until, again, hopefully somebody else wins that race and we can put out a better offering in terms of that application.
Just so I'm clear, just in the terms of the two-way communication. So a person who's trying to communicate with a deafblind person with this system would basically type in something into a keyboard, and the hand would create the symbology to let the deafblind person understand. And vice versa, can the deafblind person manipulate somehow
that's exactly right. Yeah, so the hearing, let's assume the person they're chatting with is hearing, they can either talk or type into our, Skype, our messaging service, and the hand will begin to sign, and the deafblind person hold on to it. They can rewind, fast forward, they can pause the content, they can interact with it. They have essentially the idea of the interface is they have a remote control to control that application. And then when they go to respond back, they would then turn on that camera. Essentially, the camera would turn on, they would sign back. We then take those signs, translate it back into English, send that message back to the deafblind, back to their hearing communication partner. That being said, that we're also, one of the main goals we have is also to integrate, there are VRS services, video relay services. So if a deaf person calls you right now, there's an interpreter in the middle. So they're not, they don't need to use all these gesture recognition efforts because they have an interpreter in the middle. So again, we're waiting for bigger and better gesture recognition to come out. We're also looking to see if we can create a very similar VRS environment using this device to supplement that.
Impressive.
There's a lot going on, a lot of moving parts for sure. And our linguistics aspect of what we're designing is really, I think, a lot of the reason that this can be so customizable. As you know, designing for people with disabilities, you design for one, it will work for that one person. So allowing a lot of the language models to be adapted, I think is going to be really helpful in terms of making sure that the content is very accessible for the deafblind folks.
Well, I won't ask you to repeat yourself, but did you explain how you and your team came to this project?
Yeah, I touched on it briefly, but I can go into that a little bit further. I was a student at Northeastern University studying engineering, but I knew I wanted to go into assistive technology. That's sort of the path I had after graduation. But I decided to take an American Sign Language class just because I thought it might be beneficial going forward. And part of the class is to go out into the deaf community and practice their signing, learn more about the culture. And on one of those outings, I met a deafblind woman who was part of the Deafblind Contact Center, who was our founding partner. And she was chatting with me about, I was using an interpreter at the time as I was not a skilled signer yet at that point. And she was talking to me about how it's so isolating being deafblind and not having technology, sitting at home,
Sure.
Essentially waiting for somebody to come up and talk to you. And when COVID came out, I was reading articles of deafblind people crawling through buildings, crawling through streets with no access to information. So that's when I really went to the Deafblind Contact Center, and I was like, what can we make? How can we how can I support your community in terms of technology? And they were like, oh, thank God, we need some way to communicate. They're like, it's an issue. It's been an issue forever. It's an exacerbated issue now. And I think you'll especially work with the deafblind community. They're just a historically underserved community. They have so little technology that is made for them. A lot of technology is adapted technology. So for example, the doorbell at the deafblind person's house is the light doorbell that deaf people have, and the deafblind people cannot see it. So we have a lot of small projects going on as well that just help to create these smaller projects. We're making a doorbell for deafblind folks. It takes us such, it's a fun side project for us taking away from this, and it just really does have that impact on the deafblind community.
Very interesting, Samantha.
Thank you. Yeah, and I just see Eric's comment here about kind of working alongside the deafblind community, and I cannot emphasize that enough about how no decisions can be made by hearing sighted engineers in this project. And what I kind of tell as new engineers come in, don't spend 6 weeks designing a part, spend 1 week on it because we need to test it before we can even ensure that it's going to be fruitful. In the early stages, I made a glove for the hand. It was made out of silicone, like dragon skin, things they make the like makeup for movie sets. So it feels very human-like. And I thought the deafblind folks were gonna love it. I was like, this is gonna feel so human-like. They're gonna think it's perfect. And they wouldn't even touch the hand. They thought it felt like a monster. They thought it was disgusting. I think it maybe fell into that, like, uncanny valley, maybe. They hated it. And that I give that example every time we talk to our engineers about making sure that we're not designing to make a cool robot. We're designing to make a very effective tool for the deafblind community and their needs.
So what is the feel now that they like?
Yeah, so essentially, this is TPU. So some people use it as is. We also have a number of gloves as well. So we have very soft gloves, we have fabric gloves, we have like silk, like I call them like women in like going to the opera gloves. So we have a number of different gloves, and again, just really allowing this to be as functional. Some deafblind people, the black is really helpful. Some deafblind people, they can't see the black and they might need a little bit of white. So we have a lot of options, just again, allowing that customizable aspect for their uses.
Cool.
And I haven't found anyone who likes, I keep the silicone glove just because I feel like at one point I'm going to find somebody who likes it, and it hasn't happened yet.
It's interesting, huh?
Yeah, and the goal as well, as you can see these fingers there along the back, they all have a closed profile, and that's because the deafblind people are holding it from the back. So they're holding it along the back of the hand. So we wanted to make sure that they don't get caught in any linkages, or there's no, aluminum joints along the back, and really making sure it feels like a human hand, especially along that back profile where they're going to be trying to feel the signs.
It's great. Any other questions, anyone?
I'm good. I'm delighted to know about this.
Yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to chat with you. I hadn't heard of your group, but it seems like such an incredible organization and your mission. And if we can ever be helpful at all, or if there's ever a point of collaboration, please let me know and how we can work together. Any thoughts to an open source option? We've actually thought about that so many times and have gone sort of trying to figure out, is there a way that we can make sort of an open source offering? Especially, I think a great part of this project has been the idea of spreading the word of there is this deafblind community. This is how they live. This is how they communicate. Deafblind people have jobs. They have families. I think a lot of people, when we talk to who about deafblindness, might be shocked that there's more than 2 of them, might be shocked that they are married, that they have jobs. And so a lot of the idea surrounding this idea of an open source option is maybe there's, in classrooms, they make this and they might learn how to fingerspell, or the idea that it's obviously a really cool robot, but obviously can just continue to spread that mission of spreading awareness of the deafblind community. So there are many thoughts, and hopefully we can get to the point that the technology is robust enough that I trust somebody else to put it together.
I've seen, I used to teach at Rochester Institute of Technology, home of the National Technical Institute of the Deaf. And every few years, students would come up with with some software that would recognize sign language. and it recognized a couple of signs, and yet it got a great deal of publicity. It seems plausible, though, that with the emerging large language models and the underlying architecture, that this might be the era in which good and accurate sign language recognition and good and accurate sign language video generation might be coming into its own. Is that the case? Do you know the state of the art?
Absolutely. And I think obviously at NTID, I know very well, and I know a lot of actually companies that have stemmed out of that, SignSpeak being a great company on the forefront. And I think that a lot of their demos have shown exceedingly viable and have shown great enthusiasm for kind of what can be done. I think there is just a lot of, you're basing it off of users who are not skilled. And it's actually very interesting because the problems that we have with our gesture recognition is, they're blind and they can't see the camera. And, so we have to
Right,
develop
right.
these cameras that move. But it's actually interesting chatting with these other companies is they have the same problems. They're working with people who can see and they're still not in the frame, or they're still not angled to the camera right. So I think that I completely agree. And I see companies every week, new companies coming out doing gesture recognition. And I do think within the next 5 years, it will be very applicable. Whether or not it is versatile, I think is another great question. Everyone's hands look different. People who have arthritic hands, people who, maybe have an amputee, somebody with CP, really how that works. But I think that it will, using especially the large language models and how easily we can get data now. We can easily capture data from across regions that we couldn't before. I think there's a great way to do it. And I think that's also why, our team's working on it. We're not dedicating our livelihood to it because there are great people who are working on that. And if we can create the hardware that can work alongside it, I think that's huge. I was just actually at the hospital earlier this week looking at their communication stations for deaf individuals. They have VRS services there, which is excellent. Now, how can we make that more accessible for the deafblind as well? A lot of these gesture recognitions, a lot of these companies are focusing on the deaf population, which is obviously larger, but how can we also support the deafblind community who, can't rely on pen and paper like the deaf community can? Yeah, NTID is a big one. We go down to Gallaudet, the School for the Deaf down in DC. We were actually just there in September, and it's really interesting because a lot of the folks we work with up in Boston are maybe 50 plus, and getting to work with 20-year-old students is very different. The functionalities they want is very different. They sign so fast. We were having the robot go faster than it's ever gone. So really seeing all these varying needs is really exciting to see, and really using and leveraging these institutions that have been pushing technology forward for the deaf community as well.
Cool.
Yeah, SignSpeak is a great company to keep your eye on in terms of gesture recognition out of NTID.
Sign speech.
SignSpeak.
All right, then.
And I've
So,
seen a lot
this
of the
is
animations as well. The animations I think a lot of the animations are still a bit scary, but I think that we'll get there, especially with a lot of the advancements in gaming as well, making it perfect gaming. I think those will quickly catch up.
This may be a side thing, but are you aware of an organization called VisionAid? It's actually based out of Lexington.
Oh,
They
I'm
do a
sorry
lot
about
of
that. I was still sharing my screen.
work on visually impaired community, and I can put you in touch with them just to see if there are any synergies.
That
Feels
would be
like there
great.
is.
Absolutely. Yeah, I see a lot of CVI, and yeah, I actually used to work at the Perkins School for the Blind. I did. I worked there before starting the company, and I think there's a lot of really interesting research doing into kind of what vision looks like for especially kiddos, with a lot of new research into CVI. That would be incredible if you could connect us. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. I'll forward this recording to them if you don't mind, and
Perfect.
they can take a look.
Perfect.
Oh, that's great. Any other questions? Well, if not, thank you, Samantha. Really appreciate your time, and thanks for doing this.
Absolutely. And hopefully there's a way that we can work together in the future.
Look forward to that.
Yep.
Keep us posted.
Yes.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon.
Oh, there is a
Oh.
question. Sorry, I saw another raised hand. Edge Bella, is there a question? Maybe not.
Oh, I think he was just giving applause.
Oh, okay. All right.
Thank you, Edge.
Great.
Wonderful. Well, we'll talk soon.
Alrighty.
Enjoy